Shay, we find ourselves on Zoom again.
Ah.
Oh no, are you feeling the Zoom fatigue?
Yes, the infamous Zoom fatigue for sure. Aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm tired of it, I'll admit, but I've also sort of accepted it as our reality at this point.
Right. The pandemic has brought on challenges for both teacher and student alike, Zoom fatigue being just one of the common symptoms.
Teaching and learning in the pandemic is a different beast, isn't it?
Yeah, let's unleash the beast, shall we?
Let's. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shay. And today we've decidedly unleashed the beast and intend to acknowledge and tango with the monstrosity that is teaching and learning during a global pandemic.
We're doing it. We're addressing the boogeyman under the bed.
The creepy crawlies.
Now, needless to say,
But we're going to say it anyway.
Yes, needless to say, teaching and learning as in professional development or PD, as we'll refer to it going forward, these have evolved an extraordinary amount over the last few years.
And abruptly so, right?
Yeah, I mean, everything happened pretty quickly. We were frequenting in-person networking events, giving classes the good old way until we weren't.
How I miss breathing the same air as my students, sharing a cup of coffee with colleagues in a teacher's lounge.
Me too. But I'll also admit I'm pretty terrified to transition back into in-person everything, aren't you?
I plan to ride this online learning thing out for as long as I can. If any of our listeners have read our bios, extra credit points, they'll know that I'm living that digital nomad lifestyle, traveling throughout North America with my mobile home and several computers, a monitor, a ring light, a mic.
Quite the setup you have there.
It works.
Yeah, but so you drove all the way to Seattle to see me, and now you're where?
Actually, I'm seated in the front seat of my car at a campground just outside of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado.
Nice.
So, sorry in advance for any strange sounds that make their way into this recording. It happens. So, to answer your question, I'm still lucky enough to be fully remote, but that's not true for many of our listeners. What we've gathered is that experience with teaching and PD in the pandemic look really different for different folks.
Yeah, so we asked our listeners about their experience teaching and learning through the course of the pandemic to reflect on their transitions into and out of this new normal, so to speak. We got an overwhelming amount of anecdotes from teachers around the world who were kind enough to share bits and pieces of their experiences with us.
Yes, thank you so much. We're going to try to sneak all of you in. We so appreciate your willingness to participate in this community.
Yes, so to start, Jessica in France said the transition to online teaching felt really weird. That's a good word for it, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, working from home and being able to dress comfortably and have a cappuccino in the middle of the day was great.
Oh, yeah. We love ourselves a good cappuccino and sweatpants. Business on top, couch potato on the bottom.
Treat yourself.
Oh, yeah.
But as great as being a couch potato on the bottom was, she also said it was a big struggle sometimes, especially when students had problems with the internet or she was teaching to a bunch of little black screens.
I know the feeling.
But she concluded by saying that through all of this, she's gotten pretty used to it.
Awesome. Mika in Mendoza, Argentina said that the pandemic was a game changer for her. She got to take on more private clients since she didn't have to commute and even started working on another degree.
That's awesome, Mika. Though it wasn't such a smooth transition for everyone, we have to acknowledge that the transition into online teaching and learning was different for everyone. And it also came with different degrees of support, right? Some institutions were able to support their teachers, others, not so much.
Yes. Brittany, a middle school ELA teacher in Rhode Island, USA, shared that her district incorporated monthly virtual PD sessions.
Nice.
On those days, there was no live instruction for students, and instead there would be a lengthy list of PD options to choose from throughout the day. That's commitment to PD if I've ever seen it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Kate, a K through 12 reading teacher who was based in New York City this past year, didn't feel the same support.
Mm.
There were offerings, but she found them to be driven by the agenda of the school she was working with or not relevant to her area.
Mm.
And on top of that, there was her personal resistance. She'd already spent her entire day teaching online, and she just could not fathom logging in for another Zoom call.
Ugh, yeah, I feel that. So, what does seem to be a general consensus is that there was a lack of resources at the start of the pandemic,
Yeah.
but that it has since blown up, perhaps inspiring a state of overwhelm for many.
Right. There was just so much PD,
Mhm.
more PD than I'd ever had access to before. Katie, a PD provider in Washington state, shared that during the pandemic, she was able to give access to professional learning to teachers in rural communities of her state,
Mm.
teachers who weren't able to attend state level PD before the pandemic because they lived too far away from big cities. And this is something they've decided to continue into the future.
Ah, that's fantastic to hear. There really were so many new opportunities out there, weren't there?
Yeah, it was a lot, but I honestly had the chance to connect with so many colleagues around the world. I mean, remember the T Cell International Conference? There
Hmm.
were people there from everywhere who might not have been able to travel to come otherwise. I also was able to join some professional learning networks, a book club with colleagues, and tune into lots of great online workshops I honestly never would have attended had they been in person. I could hear from experts, peers from around the world.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Of course, at this point, we have to acknowledge our great privilege in even
Yeah.
being able to explore PD opportunities in the pandemic. We were fortunate to have jobs,
Mhm.
to be able to work from home, to have the technology that we needed, the time that we needed.
Yeah, right. Really important to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
Many teachers may not have had the same access. But how about you, Shay? What was your experience like?
So, I also joined some professional learning networks
Mhm.
and tried to attend a workshop or webinar 4 or 5 times a week initially, which
Woof.
which in retrospect is wild.
Hmm.
Um, and then it dropped down to 1 or 2 because I just wasn't processing the information at the rate it was coming at me.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, I think you chose the right word there, wild. I mean,
Mm.
4 to 5 per week is a lot.
Yeah, it was. I was quite ambitious at the start of all of this.
Mhm.
Although I did also do a lot of reading.
Mhm.
I decided to start a podcast with some nerd I know. Anna, you also led a lot of professional development workshops and webinars for teachers abroad, right? What was that like?
It was good. I learned so much about how to facilitate online workshops and create engaging content. I figured out how to run a Zoom session pretty seamlessly.
Ah, no forgetting to share your screen.
Yeah, a pandemic catchphrase of mine was, I'm going to share my screen now.
Or can you see my screen?
Yeah. If you don't announce, I'm going to share my screen now, or can you see my screen? Are you actually sharing your screen?
Mm.
I think I saw a meme about that at some point. But anyway, yeah, using Zoom to lead workshops during the pandemic did help me become better at using Zoom in the classroom.
Transference of Zoom skills. I
Yeah.
think that's a cool connection. I haven't facilitated any PD during this period, but I did throw myself into a bunch of digital PD as a participant and took on classes beyond my usual workload.
Such an overachiever. You
Oh.
willingly took on classes beyond your usual workload. Very brave.
Brave or naive? I don't know. And totally. I jumped into a lot of PD opportunities at the beginning of the pandemic for 2 reasons. Partially because I felt unequipped to a certain extent,
Mm.
and also because I found myself suddenly with all of this spare time.
This reminds me, spare time, of that concept of time affluence from the Happiness Lab.
Mhm.
You listen to the Happiness Lab podcast, right?
Right. Yeah, you introduced me to it actually.
Oh,
Listeners, if you're looking for a podcast to listen to,
in addition to our podcast.
yeah, in addition to ours, of course, we highly recommend the Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos. It has so many great science based mental health tips.
So, do you remember the episode on time affluence?
I do, yeah. Time affluence, this idea of spare time. It's so good for your mental health. So, because I didn't have to navigate New York City transit systems anymore,
Mhm.
I had all of this extra time. So, I threw myself headfirst into online workshops.
Okay, well, it's not exactly the healthiest way to use our extra time.
Well, in that sense, no. But I learned so much.
Mhm.
In these Zoom seminars, I had the unique chance to be on the receiving end of information. I wasn't in the facilitator role for once, and it was spectacular. I remember a workshop I attended early on about building online community, and it was the first time I participated in a Zoom poll. I was like, oh man, this is cool. Let me figure out how to do that in my own class.
Yeah, so even though your workshop wasn't focusing on tech tools, you still got to interact with some things that could serve you in your own instruction.
Yeah, I did. Tech tools for online learning. I feel like that is the title of 95% of the PD offerings I've seen throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, especially the beginning of the pandemic came with a lot of PD that focused on easing that transition, demonstrating all the different ways you can use Zoom and Teams.
And Dead Puzzle and VoiceThread and Padlet and Nearpod. The list goes on and on.
So many.
It was definitely an adjustment at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. The first time I led a workshop on Zoom, it was a total disaster. I was doing this, I was supposed to be doing this in-person session with a colleague, and we'd planned it for in person, but then all of a sudden things changed and switched to digital. So we
Mm.
kind of converted it and made all of our activities into digital activities. But I mean, I hadn't used Zoom enough at that point to be able to feel comfortable controlling all of it at once. I remember feeling so overwhelmed by like the technology of it and having to bring stellar content while managing the tech system.
Ah, well, I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you think. I mean, there's a reason in online conferences and workshops on Zoom that there's a moderator or somebody who's on the back end kind of organizing the
Mhm.
breakout rooms so that the person who's facilitating can actually focus on content, right?
Yeah, I'm sure the attendees forgave us, but it happened to be a workshop on media literacy.
Oh man,
It
go
was pretty
figure.
unfortunate, but I've come a long way since then.
Great. Well, facilitating content and managing tech is very challenging, which is why we need to give ourselves and each other a little bit of slack in that department.
So true.
So then it got to a point where teachers figured the techie part out, right? At least enough to get by. And people started getting itchy about other topics for PD. I know I did.
So, what topics or forms of PD were most useful for you then? Or what did you want more of?
Well, I was really worried about how I was going to continue to cultivate community in an
Mm.
online environment. So I attended a bunch of webinars around that topic. I read a lot about the socio emotional elements involved in the learning process. I also took this opportunity to think more deeply about issues related to being a global citizen, what that means, why it's important, how it's actually rooted in privilege.
That sounds really interesting. Pretty wide range there.
Yeah, that was the beauty of PD through the pandemic for me. I was able to seek out the themes that were most relevant to me. What about you? What did you get into?
Well, so much.
Mm.
But one area of PD that I did actually focus on for myself, I attended a couple of teaching through trauma workshops. There was a lot of talk of collective and individual trauma during the pandemic.
Of course.
Yeah. And definitely some workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I went to some smaller events within the English language programs community, but I remember that great one that you and I attended together. It was on, I think it was like the anti racist curriculum.
Oh, yeah, the Black Lives Matter syllabus with Dr. Frank Leon Roberts.
Yes, that was so energizing.
Energizing. That's a great way to describe it. It was a great
Yeah.
one. Mhm.
Yeah. So trauma and diversity, equity and inclusion, right? Those were my 2 points of focus.
Hmm.
But after a while of attending workshops left and right, well, I got tired.
Right. Really?
Yeah, it was just too much to juggle with all of my other professional and personal commitments.
Oh gosh, Anna, remember that time we both signed up for a workshop on reflective pedagogy? Our favorite topic. And the second the person said, now let's go into the breakout rooms, you and I just logged off. And then we texted each other and we're like, I just logged off. Oh, me too.
Yeah, we were both pretty burnt out at that point. There
Mhm.
is something to be said about taking a passive role in PD. Sometimes it's just nice to be talked at when your energy's low.
Mm-hmm. And I think that might have been March of 2021. So our energy was definitely getting depleted. Actually, one of our listeners, Kelly, who teaches ninth grade civics, didn't love the PD offered by her district on Zoom and was
Mm.
thrilled when her school started up in person PD again. She believes that it's just more organic for building ideas and working together in person. And Kelly caught us when she said, teachers are worse than students about disengaging on Zoom.
Yeah, damn, I feel so
Yeah,
exposed.
we're not the only ones, though. That I know for sure.
I think the fact that we had the ability to log off when our minds weren't fully in it is an advantage of digital PD. You have the power to choose.
Mhm. And there's so much to choose from.
Yeah, but there is such a thing as taking advantage of too many opportunities. I
Mhm.
feel like I attended so many high quality free events, but I think I probably went a little bit too crazy with them simply because they were free.
Oh, yeah. I have trouble saying no to free events, free things, or, well, just no in general, I guess. Something I struggle with.
Yeah. And in a blink of an eye, we've said yes to everything and lost our time affluence.
Womp womp. Yeah, and I think a lot of teachers ended up feeling similar to how we felt. We were in hyperdrive, trying to keep up with the demands of implementing online classes, soaking up all the PD and resources that we could.
Yeah. So, what are we able to take away from participating in PD through a global pandemic?
In my mind, the simplest way to put it is that there is a need to personalize your PD path, whether we're living through a crisis or not.
Totally. I think anyone can appreciate the power of choice.
Mhm.
Determine one or two areas you want to focus on and figure out how you learn best. What do you need from an instructional standpoint? How do you want to receive that information? Do you want to take on an active or passive role in the process?
Mhm. And what do you value? Do you want to be inspired? Do you want to laugh a little? Hear about research? This opportunity to dictate what we deem important is so vital if we want PD to be meaningful and sustainable.
And there are different ways to look at whether PD is sustainable. I mean, is it accessible or prohibitive in terms of cost? Is
Mhm.
it too time consuming?
Nice. So, listeners, how have your PD preferences shifted during the pandemic? How has participating in PD through the pandemic informed your teaching? Have you perhaps discovered your very favorite PD podcast?
Hint, hint.
Spread the word.
You can join the conversation on our various social media accounts. Email us via our contact form at teacherthinkaloud.com or comment via Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. We welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
And for more resources and references on today's topic, take a look at our website and our podcast's anchor page, anchor.fm/teacherthinkaloud.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast today. And until next time, happy teaching
And happy reflecting.